Admiral Marcus Hartwell adjusted his reading glasses and settled into the leather chair behind his mahogany desk at Naval Special Warfare Command. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of his Norfolk office, casting long shadows across stacks of personnel files that demanded his attention. At 58, Hartwell carried himself with the measured confidence of a man who had earned every star on his shoulder through 3 decades of service, including 2 tours as a SEAL team commander and countless classified operations that would never see the light of day. His aide, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, knocked twice before entering with a steaming cup of black coffee and a tablet loaded with the day's agenda. "Good morning, Admiral. Your 9 o'clock briefing with the training division heads has been moved to 9:15. Commander Rodriguez wants to discuss the new selection protocols." Hartwell nodded, accepting the coffee with practiced efficiency. "And the personnel reviews for the upcoming deployment rotations? All set for 10:30, sir. There's one interesting case that might catch your attention." Chun hesitated, scrolling through her notes. "We have a chief petty officer requesting reactivation after medical leave. Clean record, exemplary service history, but there's something unusual about his call sign." "Unusual how?" Hartwell's attention sharpened. In his experience, call signs told stories, and unusual ones usually meant interesting stories. "Iron Ghost, sir." The training supervisors flagged it because none of them have heard of it before, but it appears consistently throughout his service record dating back 15 years. They're curious about the origin. Hartwell paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Something cold and electric shot down his spine, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Iron Ghost. The name hit him like a physical blow, dragging memories from depths he thought he had sealed away forever. "What's the chief's name?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Torres, sir. Chief Petty Officer Miguel Antonio Torres. Served with SEAL Team 6, multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Currently assigned to Training Division pending medical clearance." The coffee cup trembled slightly in Hartwell's hand before he carefully set it down. Miguel Torres. After all these years, that name still had the power to transport him back to the dust and heat of Kandahar province, to a night that changed everything he thought he knew about courage and sacrifice. "Sir, are you all right?" Hartwell realized he had been staring at his desk for several long seconds. "Yes, fine. Tell me more about Chief Torres's medical situation." Chun consulted her tablet. "IED blast 6 months ago in Syria. Traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, extensive burns over 30% of his body. Medical board cleared him for limited duty last month, but he's pushing for full operational status." She looked up from the screen. His attending physician noted unusual determination in recovery. Apparently, he refused pain medication for most of his rehabilitation and insisted on maintaining physical training throughout. Of course he did, Hartwell thought. Miguel Torres had always been different, even by SEAL standards. The Admiral's mind drifted back 15 years to when he had been Captain Hartwell, commanding SEAL Team 3 in one of the most volatile regions of Afghanistan. It was 2011, and the war was at its peak intensity. Hartwell's team had been tasked with a series of high-value target operations in the mountains along the Pakistani border, where Taliban fighters moved like ghosts through terrain that had swallowed armies for centuries. His team was good, damn good, but they were facing an enemy that knew every rock, every cave, every escape route in mountains that rose like broken teeth against the sky. Miguel Torres had arrived as a replacement for a team member lost to an IED. Fresh from advanced training, Torres was technically proficient, but untested in the crucible of sustained combat operations. Hartwell remembered his first impression: quiet, intense, with dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him. Unlike many new operators who compensated for nervousness with bravado, Torres simply watched, learned, and prepared. The younger SEALs had initially dismissed him as just another new guy, someone to be watched and evaluated before being fully accepted into the Brotherhood. But there had been something different about Torres from the beginning, a stillness that reminded Hartwell of deep water. "Admiral," Chen's voice brought him back to the present. "I want to see Chief Torres's complete file. Everything. Medical records, service history, commendations, after-action reports. Have it on my desk within the hour." Yes, sir. Should I schedule a meeting? Hartwell considered this. Part of him wanted to see Miguel immediately, to confirm that the man who had earned the call sign Iron Ghost was indeed the same person who had haunted his thoughts for over a decade. Another part of him needed time to process what this reunion might mean. Not yet. Let me review his file first. And Chun, I want this kept quiet for now. No mention of my interest to anyone. After his aide left, Hartwell stood and walked to the window overlooking the training complex. Somewhere out there, Miguel Torres was preparing to return to full duty, carrying with him a story that had never been fully told, a legend that lived in the classified files and whispered conversations of those who had been there. Hartwell closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember that night in November 2011, when a routine extraction mission had gone catastrophically wrong, and a young SEAL had made a choice that saved 12 lives while earning himself a call sign that would echo through the halls of naval special warfare for years to come. The mission had been designated Operation Pale Horse, a night infiltration to extract a high-value intelligence asset from a Taliban stronghold in the Karengal Valley. Intelligence suggested light resistance, standard guards, and clear extraction routes. Intelligence, as it turned out, had been spectacularly wrong. Hartwell's team had inserted via helicopter at 0200 hours, fast roping into a landing zone that intelligence had assured them was secure. The plan was simple: move 2 clicks to the target building, extract the asset, and be back to the pickup zone within 3 hours. Clean, efficient, and routine. But the Taliban had been waiting. The entire valley was a carefully orchestrated trap, with over 200 fighters positioned in prepared positions that had taken months to establish. The moment Hartwell's team approached the target building, the night exploded in a symphony of automatic weapons fire and rocket-propelled grenades. Within minutes, they were pinned down in a compound that offered minimal cover, facing overwhelming odds with their extraction helicopter forced to abort due to the intensity of enemy fire. Radio communications were being jammed, and their GPS coordinates were being bracketed by mortar fire that was walking closer with each salvo. That was when Torres had stepped forward and volunteered for something that every man present knew was a suicide mission. "Sir," he had said in that quiet way of his, "I can get to the high ground and provide overwatch for the extraction." He was pointing to a rocky outcropping about 800 meters away that dominated the valley. "If I can establish a position there, I can suppress enough of their fire to get the bird back in." Hartwell had looked at the terrain between their position and the ridgeline. It was open ground swept by crossfire from multiple enemy positions. Even if Torres managed to reach the rocks, he would be completely isolated, with no hope of extraction himself. Negative, Torres. We find another way. But Torres had that look in his eyes, the same look Hartwell had seen in the mirror on nights when impossible decisions had to be made. "Sir, with respect, there is no other way. They got us boxed in, and every minute we wait here gives them time to bring up heavier weapons." The sound of incoming mortars punctuated his words, and several team members instinctively pressed themselves lower against the compound wall. "If you go out there, son, you're not coming back." Torres had smiled then, an expression Hartwell would remember for the rest of his life. It wasn't the smile of a man accepting death, but rather the smile of someone who had found perfect clarity in an impossible moment. "Maybe not, sir, but 12 guys definitely aren't coming back if I stay here." Before Hartwell could respond, Torres had disappeared into the darkness, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to bend shadows around him. For several minutes, there was only the distant sound of his movement and the ongoing enemy fire. Then, from the rocky outcropping, came the distinctive crack of a precision rifle. Torres had not only reached the ridgeline, but had done so while carrying enough ammunition and equipment to sustain a prolonged engagement. Over the next 4 hours, from his isolated position, he had systematically dismantled the Taliban ambush with precision fire that seemed almost supernatural in its accuracy. Enemy machine gun nests fell silent one by one. Mortar teams found themselves under such accurate counterfire that they were forced to abandon their positions. The coordinated ambush dissolved into chaos as Torres picked apart their command structure with shots that defied the limitations of darkness and distance. When the extraction helicopter finally managed to approach the landing zone, Torres provided covering fire that allowed Hartwell's entire team to board safely. As the helicopter lifted off, they could see muzzle flashes from the ridgeline, where Torres continued his one-man war against overwhelming odds. "We're coming back for you, Torres," Hartwell had shouted into his radio. The response came back calm and steady. "Negative, sir. Too hot. I'll find my own way home." Those were the last words anyone heard from Miguel Torres for 3 days. Hartwell's attention returned to the present as his desk phone rang. Chen's voice came through the intercom. "Sir, Chief Torres's file is here, and I got something else you might want to know." "What is it?" "The chief is here, sir. He's in the building for his reactivation physical. Medical clinic, 2nd floor." Hartwell felt his heart rate increase. After 15 years of wondering, of classified debriefs that never told the complete story, Miguel Torres was 1 floor below him. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. Bring me that file." As he waited for the documents that would fill in the gaps of a story he thought he knew, Hartwell reflected on the nature of legends. In the military, stories grew in the telling. Details became embellished, and ordinary acts of courage transformed into mythic tales. But some stories remained stubbornly, impossibly true no matter how many times they were examined. The Iron Ghost was one of those stories. When Chen returned with a thick manila folder, Hartwell dismissed her and locked his office door. The file contained everything: Torres's service record, medical history, commendations, and, most importantly, the classified after-action reports from Operation Pale Horse and its aftermath. The official record was stark in its understatement. Torres had held his position on the ridge line for 6 hours after the extraction helicopter departed, engaging multiple enemy positions while completely surrounded. When ammunition ran low, he had begun using weapons captured from eliminated enemy fighters. When those ran out, he had continued the fight with improvised explosives created from ordnance left behind by retreating Taliban forces. For 3 days, reports had filtered in from various intelligence sources about a lone sniper systematically disrupting Taliban operations throughout the Karengal Valley. Communications intercepts suggested the enemy believed they were facing a supernatural entity, a ghost that could appear anywhere, strike with devastating precision, and vanish without a trace. When Torres finally made contact with friendly forces, he had walked out of the mountains carrying intelligence gathered from overrun enemy positions, detailed maps of Taliban supply routes, and actionable information that led to the disruption of 3 major insurgent operations. The medical report from his debriefing noted multiple untreated wounds, severe dehydration, and signs of prolonged exposure. When asked how he had survived, Torres had simply stated, "I kept moving." The psychological evaluation that followed was equally remarkable. Despite being isolated behind enemy lines for 3 days, engaging in constant combat, and facing what any reasonable person would consider certain death, Torres showed no signs of post-traumatic stress or psychological damage. The evaluating psychiatrist had noted, "Subject demonstrates unusual psychological resilience and appears to view his experience as simply another challenging mission successfully completed." It was the commendation section of the file that made Hartwell pause. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart, and a Presidential Unit citation. But there was also something else, a citation he had never seen before, a classified commendation signed by the Secretary of Defense himself, acknowledging Torres's actions had prevented what intelligence assessment suggested could have been a significant shift in Taliban operational capabilities in the region. But it was the final document in the file that made Hartwell's blood run cold. A psychological evaluation from 3 months ago, following Torres's medical board review after his injury in Syria. The psychiatrist's notes were clinical but revealing. Subject exhibits classic symptoms of survivor's guilt, though he adamantly refuses to discuss the specifics of his combat experiences. When pressed about his motivations for returning to full operational status, he stated, "Some things you carry forever. The only way to honor that weight is to keep moving forward." Subject demonstrates exceptional mental fortitude, but appears to be driven by unresolved psychological factors related to past combat experiences. Hartwell set the file aside and walked to his window again. Miguel Torres wasn't just seeking reactivation. He was still fighting the same war he had been fighting for 15 years, still carrying the weight of choices made in impossible moments. The Admiral realized that the question wasn't whether Torres deserved to return to full duty. The question was whether the Navy could provide him with something more important than another mission. The recognition that some battles had already been won, and some ghost deserved finally to rest. But first, Hartwell needed to face his own ghost. In 15 years, he had never properly thanked Miguel Torres for what he had done that night in the Corango Valley. He had never told him that his actions had not only saved 12 lives, but had also taught a career officer what real courage looked like. Hartwell picked up his phone and dialed the medical clinic extension. "This is Admiral Hartwell. Is Chief Torres still in the building? I'd like to speak with him." The response was immediate and professional. "Yes, sir. The chief just finished his examination. Shall I ask him to report to your office?" "Please. And tell him it's regarding his call sign." As he waited for the reunion that was 15 years in the making, Hartwell wondered if Miguel Torres remembered a young captain who had been forced to leave him behind in the mountains of Afghanistan. He wondered if the man who had earned the title Iron Ghost understood that his legend had shaped the career and conscience of every officer who had heard his story. Most of all, he wondered if it was possible to adequately thank someone who had redefined what it meant to be a warrior. The knock on his door came exactly 10 minutes later. Hartwell took a deep breath, straightened his uniform, and prepared to meet a ghost who had never really been gone. "Come in." The door opened, and Chief Petty Officer Miguel Torres stepped into Admiral Hartwell's office with the precise, economical movements of a career operator. 15 years had changed him in ways both visible and subtle. The young SEAL who had disappeared into the Afghan mountains had been replaced by a man whose presence seemed to absorb light and sound around him. Gray touched his temples now, and a network of scars traced the left side of his face and neck, evidence of his recent injuries in Syria. But his eyes remained the same, dark, alert, and holding depths that spoke of things seen and endured. Torres stood at attention, his uniform immaculate despite having just completed a medical examination. The bearing was perfect, professional, and somehow familiar in a way that transported Hartwell back 15 years in an instant. "Chief Torres reporting as requested, sir." Hartwell studied the man before him, searching for signs of recognition in those steady eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. "At ease, Chief. Please have a seat." Torres moved to the chair opposite Hartwell's desk with fluid precision, settling into it with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to being ready for action at any moment. His hands rested naturally on his knees, relaxed but positioned for quick movement. Even sitting, he maintained the alertness of a man who had learned that survival depended on constant awareness. Hartwell leaned back in his chair, still studying Torres's face. "Do you recognize me, Chief?" A flicker of something passed through Torres's expression, so brief that most people would have missed it. But Hartwell had spent decades reading the subtle communications of men under pressure, and he caught the moment of recognition before Torres's professional mask reasserted itself. "Sir, your face is familiar, but I can't place the context." "Afghanistan, Corango Valley, November 2011. This time the reaction was unmistakable. Torres's entire body tensed slightly, his breathing paused for just a moment, and something shifted in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the careful control of a man accessing memories he kept locked away. "Captain Hartwell, it wasn't a question. Admiral now, but yes. I was your team commander that night." Torres nodded slowly, and for the first time since entering the office, he seemed to relax slightly. "I remember, sir. You ordered the extraction, made sure everyone got home safe. Everyone except you." The words hung in the air between them, carrying 15 years of unresolved guilt and unspoken questions. Torres's expression remained neutral, but Hartwell could see the man processing, deciding how much to reveal. "I got home eventually, sir. Just took a different route." Hartwell leaned forward. 3 days behind enemy lines. "Alone. That wasn't a route, Chief. That was a miracle." "Respectfully, sir, it was just staying focused on the mission." "And what was the mission in your mind?" Torres considered this for a long moment, his gaze steady and direct. Getting my team home safe. All of them. That included making sure no one had to come back for me. Hartwell felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of guilt he had carried for 15 years. This was why he had never forgotten Miguel Torres, why the young SEAL's actions that night had haunted him through every promotion, every command decision, every moment when leadership required choosing between acceptable losses and impossible risks. I've read your file, Chief. All of it. The classified reports, the intelligence assessments, the psychological evaluations. Do you know what they called you after that night? Iron Ghost, sir. I'm aware of the call sign. Do you know why? Torres shifted slightly in his chair. This was clearly territory he didn't like to explore. My understanding is that enemy communications intercepted during the operation suggested they believe they were facing something other than a conventional combatant. They thought you were dead, Chief. The Taliban fighters in that valley were convinced they were being hunted by the spirit of a killed warrior. Your precision, your ability to appear and disappear, the way you seemed to know their movements before they made them. They started calling you the Iron Ghost because you struck like metal and moved like mist. Hartwell pulled out a classified folder he had retrieved from the intelligence archives that morning. But that's not the whole story, is it? The call sign stuck because of what happened after you made contact with our forces. Torres's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, what you did during those 3 days wasn't just survival. It was a systematic campaign. You gathered intelligence, disrupted supply lines, eliminated key personnel, and effectively shut down Taliban operations in a 20-square-kilometer area. Single-handedly. Hartwell opened the folder and read from a document marked with the highest classification levels. Intelligence assessment conducted 6 months after Operation Pale Horse concluded that your actions during those 3 days prevented the Taliban from launching a coordinated offensive that would have resulted in significant coalition casualties. Conservative estimates suggest you saved between 200 and 400 friendly forces. Torres remained silent, but something in his posture suggested he was uncomfortable with this line of discussion. The question that's haunted me for 15 years, Chief, is how? How does one man, cut off from support, outnumbered 200 to 1, injured and running low on supplies, not just survive, but execute what intelligence analysts called the most effective solo operation in the recorded history of asymmetric warfare? Torres met Hartwell's gaze directly. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. And this conversation is off the record. With respect, Admiral, you're asking the wrong question. What should I be asking? You should be asking why it mattered enough to keep going when any rational person would have found a place to hide and waited for rescue. Hartwell set the folder aside and leaned back. All right, why did it matter? Torres was quiet for almost a minute, clearly wrestling with words for thoughts he rarely shared. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Hartwell understand why psychological evaluators had noted unusual emotional depth in this man. Sir, you remember the intelligence asset we were supposed to extract that night? Of course. Local informant who had been providing information about Taliban leadership movements. His name was Ahmadi. Ahmad Ahmadi. He had 3 daughters and a son. The Taliban knew he had been helping coalition forces, and they were planning to execute not just him, but his entire family as an example to other potential informants. Torres paused, his hands tightening slightly on his knees. When the ambush started and everything went to hell, I saw Ahmadi get hit. Small arms fire, center mass. He went down about 50 meters from our position. We couldn't reach him. The fire was too intense. No, sir. But he was still alive when I left our position to reach the ridgeline. He was conscious, trying to crawl toward us, and he was calling out something in Pashto. Hartwell felt a chill run down his spine. What was he saying? He was giving me his home address. Over and over. He knew he was dying, and he was trying to tell someone where his family was so they could be protected. The office fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Hartwell began to understand something about the man sitting across from him, something that explained not just the events of 15 years ago, but the psychological profile he had read that morning. You went to his house. Torres nodded. During the second day, the Taliban had been there first. The whole family was gone, but There were signs of struggle, blood on the floor. Neighbors who were brave enough to talk said they had been taken to a compound about 5 kilometers north. And you went after them? Yes, sir. Alone, behind enemy lines, to save the family of a man you barely knew. He died, trying to give me information that would help me protect them. Seemed like the least I could do was use it. Hartwell stared at Torres for a long moment, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. The compound you hit on the second day. Intelligence reports suggested it was a command post for the local Taliban leadership. It was both, sir. They were using it as a prison for families of suspected informants. Ahmadi's family was there, along with 6 others. 23 enemy killed, according to the reports. They made it a tactical necessity, sir. I tried to minimize casualties, but they wouldn't surrender, and I couldn't leave those families. Hartwell consulted his notes. And the families? Extracted safely during the night. I led them to a village known to be friendly to coalition forces about 10 kilometers south. Local militia there confirmed they would be protected. The Admiral sat back in his chair, finally, understanding the full scope of what had happened that night and in the days that followed. Miguel Torres hadn't just survived an impossible situation. He had turned it into a rescue mission that saved dozens of innocent lives while systematically dismantling the Taliban network that threatened them. Chief, in your psychological evaluation, you mentioned carrying weight that you'll never put down. Is this what you were referring to? Torres's expression became carefully neutral. Sir, Ahmadi was dying because he chose to help coalition forces. His family was targeted because of that choice. If that weight gets easier to carry, it means you've forgotten why it mattered in the first place. And that's why you want to return to full operational status? To carry more weight? No, sir. To make sure that when good people make hard choices, someone is there to honor those choices with action instead of just words. Hartwell understood now why Miguel Torres had never truly left that valley in Afghanistan. Why every mission since had been an extension of that one night when a young SEAL learned that some duties transcended orders, survival, and even common sense. Chief, I need to tell you something. For 15 years, I've carried guilt about leaving you behind that night. I've second-guessed that decision in every command situation I've faced since. Torres shook his head. Sir, with respect, that's the wrong kind of weight to carry. You made the right call. 12 men went home to their families because of your decision. And how many people went home to their families because of yours? Torres didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm, enough to make it worth carrying forward. Hartwell stood and moved to his window, looking out at the training complex where the next generation of SEALs was learning to make impossible decisions in impossible situations. Chief, I've read your recent medical reports. The doctors are cleared you for limited duty, but they have concerns about your psychological readiness for full operational deployment. Sir, I understand their concerns, but I respectfully disagree with their assessment. Their concern isn't about your capability, Chief. It's about your motivation. They think you're trying to prove something, that you're seeking situations that will allow you to repeat the heroics of Afghanistan. Torres stood as well, moving with the same control precision. Permission to clarify something, sir? Go ahead. I'm not trying to repeat anything, Admiral. I'm trying to finish something. Finish what? Torres looked directly at Hartwell, and for the first time since entering the office, his professional mask slipped completely. What the Admiral saw in those eyes was not the reckless determination of a man seeking glory or validation, but the quiet, implacable resolve of someone who had made a fundamental decision about what his life would mean. Sir, there are still people out there making the same choice Ahmadi made. Still families at risk because good people decided to trust us with their lives. As long as that's true, as long as people are willing to risk everything to help us accomplish the mission, then someone needs to be willing to risk everything to make sure their trust isn't misplaced. Hartwell returned to his desk and sat down, steepling his fingers as he considered the man before him. Miguel Torres wasn't seeking redemption or trying to recapture past glory. He was simply continuing to be exactly what he had always been, a warrior who understood that the highest honor wasn't in the winning, but in the protecting. Chief, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to give me an honest answer. Are you afraid of dying? Torres considered this carefully. No more than I'm afraid of living with the knowledge that I could have made a difference and chose not to. And are you prepared for the possibility that your next mission might be your last? Sir, I've been prepared for that possibility since November 15th, 2011, at 0347 hours when I left our defensive position to reach the ridgeline. Everything since then has been borrowed time, and I intend to spend it well. Hartwell made his decision. Chief Torres, I'm recommending you for full operational status with one condition. Sir, you're going to accept a new assignment. I'm transferring you to the training command here at Naval Special Warfare. You're going to help teach the next generation of SEALs what it really means to carry the weight of other people's trust. Torres looked genuinely surprised for the first time since entering the office. Sir, I appreciate the confidence, but I was hoping for a team assignment. Chief, you've been on a team assignment for 15 years. You've been carrying the responsibility for every family, every informant, every ally who trusted us with their lives. It's time to teach other people how to carry that weight properly. Hartwell stood and extended his hand. Besides, Iron Ghost isn't just a call sign anymore. It's a standard, and standards are something you teach, not something you keep to yourself. Torres stood and shook the Admiral's hand, his grip firm and steady. Understood, sir. I won't let you down. Chief, you've never let anyone down. That's exactly why you're the right person for this job. As Torres turned to leave, Hartwell called out once more. Chief, one more thing. Thank you for Ahmad Ahmadi's family, for my team that night, for every person who's been safer because you decided their lives were worth the risk. Thank you. Torres paused at the door, his back still to the Admiral. Sir, with respect, you don't thank people for doing what's right. You just make sure you're ready to do the same when your time comes. After Torres left, Hartwell sat alone in his office, understanding that he had just met one of those rare individuals who define what honor looks like when everything else falls away. Miguel Torres hadn't become the Iron Ghost because of supernatural skill or reckless bravery. He had become a legend because when faced with the choice between personal survival and protecting others, he had chosen others so consistently and completely that it had become his defining characteristic. The Admiral picked up his phone and dialed the training division. This is Admiral Hartwell. I'm sending you a new instructor, Chief Petty Officer Miguel Torres. I want him developing curriculum for advanced ethics and decision-making under extreme stress. Yes, sir. What's his specialty? Hartwell looked out at the training complex again, where young SEALs were learning to be warriors. His specialty is remembering why we fight. 3 weeks later, Chief Torres stood before his first class at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility. The room was filled with 48 SEAL candidates in the final phase of their training, young men who had survived months of physical and mental challenges that eliminated over 80% of those who started the program. They sat in neat rows, their uniforms crisp, their attention focused, believing they understood what it meant to be warriors. Torres studied their faces, seeing echoes of his younger self in their confidence and determination. These men had proven they could endure pain, follow orders under pressure, and work as a team in hostile environments. What they hadn't yet learned was that all of that was just preparation for the moments when the textbooks ran out and conscience became the only compass that mattered. Good morning. I'm Chief Torres, and for the next 2 weeks, we're going to discuss something that isn't covered in your tactical manuals or weapons training. He paused, letting his words settle. We're going to talk about why everything else you've learned matters. A hand shot up from the third row. Chief, isn't that covered in the mission and values briefings? Torres nodded at the young petty officer. Tell me what those briefings taught you about mission priority. Mission first, Chief. Complete the objective, protect the team, return with honor. Good. Standard answer. Torres moved from behind the podium, beginning to pace slowly in front of class. Now, tell me what you do when completing the mission requires abandoning someone who trusted you with their life. The room fell silent. This wasn't a question with a textbook answer, and the candidates were smart enough to recognize the shift in tone. Or what you do when protecting the team means watching innocent people die, or when returning with honor means leaving honor behind. Torres stopped pacing and faced the class directly. Anyone want to take a shot at those? Another hand went up, this time from a candidate in the back row. Chief, those are situational judgment calls. You assess the tactical situation and make the best decision possible with available information. Petty Officer Williams, right? Torres had memorized all their names and background before the first class. You've got a degree in international relations from Georgetown. Good academic record, strong performance in training. Your answer sounds like it came from a strategy seminar. Williams straightened slightly, unsure if he was being criticized or complimented. The problem with situational judgment calls, Williams, is that situations don't make judgments. People do. And when you're making those judgments at 3 in the morning, surrounded by people who want to kill you, with incomplete information and impossible choices, academic theory becomes a luxury you can't afford. Torres moved to a whiteboard and wrote a date, November 15th, 2011. Then he wrote coordinates that meant nothing to the candidates, but had been burned into his memory for 15 years. I'm going to tell you a story, not a training scenario, not a case study from a military academy textbook. A real story about real people who made real choices with real consequences. He turned back to the class. When I'm finished, I want you to tell me what you would have done. Not what you think you should say, not what sounds heroic or tactically sound. What you honestly believe you would have done. For the next hour, Torres walked the candidates through Operation Pale Horse, step by step. He described the intelligence briefing, the insertion, the ambush that turned a routine extraction into a nightmare. He explained the tactical situation, the overwhelming enemy numbers, the limited options, and the impossible choice between leaving a wounded informant behind or risking the entire team. But he didn't tell them about his decision to leave the defensive position. Instead, he stopped at the moment when Captain Hartwell ordered the extraction and everyone had to choose between abandoning Ahmad Ahmadi or staying to fight impossible odds. So there's your situation, Torres concluded. 12 American lives, 1 Afghan informant who was wounded and exposed, 200 enemy fighters, no air support, and a narrow window for extraction. The captain has made his call. What do you do? The candidates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't a theoretical exercise anymore. Torres had made it personal and immediate in a way that stripped away easy answers. Williams raised his hand again. Chief, from a tactical standpoint, the captain's decision is correct. You can't risk 12 lives for one, especially when the informant's survival chances are minimal. Good tactical analysis, Torres acknowledged. Anyone disagree? Petty Officer Martinez, a quiet candidate from Texas who rarely spoke in class, raised his hand tentatively. Chief, I understand the tactical reasoning, but doesn't leaving the informant send a message that we don't keep our promises? How do we get other informants to trust us if word gets out that we abandon people when things get dangerous? Interesting point, Martinez. Strategic thinking about long-term consequences. What about the rest of you? Petty Officer Jackson, built like a linebacker and known for his aggressive approach to problem-solving, spoke up without raising his hand. Chief, seems to me like you're looking at this wrong. The real question isn't whether to leave the informant. The real question is how to save everyone. Explain that, Jackson. Well, Chief, maybe the extraction isn't the only option. Maybe someone creates a diversion, draws fire away from the informant position, gives the rest of the team time to reach him. Torres felt a familiar tightness in his chest. These young men were approaching the same logic that had driven his decision 15 years ago. That's a possibility, Jackson. Who creates the diversion? Jackson's confidence faltered slightly. Well, whoever's in the best position to execute it. And what are that person's survival chances? Not good, Chief, but maybe good enough if they're smart and lucky. Torres moved to another whiteboard and began sketching the terrain around the compound where they had been trapped. Let me show you the actual layout. Here's our position, here's where Ahmadi went down, and here are the enemy positions based on muzzle flash analysis. He drew with precise strokes, recreating the tactical situation with the accuracy of someone who had studied every angle, every line of sight, every possible approach. The candidates leaned forward, studying the diagram with the intensity of students facing a final exam. Jackson, show me your diversion plan. The big petty officer stood and approached the whiteboard, studying the diagram for several minutes before pointing to a ridge line that dominated the valley. If someone could reach this high ground, they could provide overwatch and suppress enemy fire long enough for the team to extract with the informant. How does someone reach that position? Jackson traced a route with his finger, his expression growing more troubled as he realized the implications of his plan. They have to cross about 800 meters of open ground under fire. And once they're there, yes, once they're there, they're cut off. No extraction route. Torres nodded. That's exactly right, Jackson. The person who executes that plan doesn't come home. The room was completely silent now. The candidates were beginning to understand that this wasn't just a tactical exercise. It was a moral examination that every warrior eventually faced. So let's refine the question, Torres continued. Are you willing to die to save someone you barely know? Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for the abstract principle that America keeps its promises? Are you willing to orphan your own children so that someone else's children don't lose their father? Petty Officer Chun, one of only 2 Asian Americans in the class, raised her hand. Chief, those aren't just abstract principles. They're the foundation of why people trust us. If we only keep our promises when it's convenient, then our promises are worthless. So you would make the sacrifice? Chun hesitated, clearly struggling with the personal implications of her philosophical position. I think I would have to, because if I didn't, I don't know how I could live with myself afterward. Torres turned to face the entire class. How many of you agree with Petty Officer Chun? About half the hands went up, though some rose more slowly than others. How many disagree? The remaining hands rose, with a few candidates abstaining entirely. Interesting split. Now let me ask you something else. How many of you have children? For hands went up. How many of you are married or engaged? 12 more hands. How many of you have parents, siblings, or other family members who depend on you emotionally or financially? Nearly every hand in the room rose. Torres nodded slowly. Now think about those people. Picture their faces. Imagine explaining to your wife why you chose to die for a stranger. Imagine your parents at your funeral, wondering why their son decided that someone else's father was more important than they were. The room's atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What started as an intellectual exercise had become intensely personal. Anyone want to change their answer? Several hands went down among those who had initially supported the sacrifice. The moral clarity that seemed obvious in abstract terms became murky when filtered through personal relationships and real consequences. Torres returned to the whiteboard and wrote a name, Ahmadi. Let me tell you about the man we were supposed to extract that night. 42 years old, worked as a translator for coalition forces during the day, and gathered intelligence on Taliban movements in his spare time. He had 3 daughters, ages 8, 11, and 14, and a son who was 16. His wife had died 2 years earlier from an illness that could have been treated if their local clinic had better medical supplies. The candidates listened intently as Torres continued. Ahmadi wasn't helping us for money. We offered payment, but he refused it. He was helping us because he believed his children would have a better future in an Afghanistan without Taliban control. Every piece of intelligence he provided put his family at risk. He knew that, and he did it anyway. Torres paused, letting this information settle before continuing. The intelligence Ahmadi provided over 6 months led to the capture or elimination of 12 high-value Taliban targets, prevented 2 major attacks on coalition forces, and helped identify supply routes that were subsequently interdicted. Conservative estimates suggest his information saved over 100 coalition lives. The moral calculation in the room was shifting again. This wasn't just about keeping abstract promises. It was about honoring the specific courage of a specific man who had risked everything to help them accomplish their mission. Petty Officer Williams, Torres called out. Still think this is just a situational judgment call? Williams, who had been increasingly quiet as the discussion progressed, shook his head. No, Chief. This is about what kind of people we choose to be when everything is on the line. Exactly. Torres moved back to the center of the room. Military ethics aren't just about following rules or calculating acceptable losses. They're about understanding that every choice you make either honors or betrays the trust that people place in you. He pointed to the diagram on the whiteboard. Someone did reach that ridgeline that night. Someone did create the diversion that allowed the rest of the team to extract safely. And Someone did spend 3 days behind enemy lines, making sure that a Mahdi's sacrifice wasn't wasted. The candidates were completely focused now, understanding that they were about to learn how the story ended. That person was me. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. These young SEALs had been listening to a theoretical discussion about moral choices, but now they realized they were sitting in the presence of someone who had actually made the choice they were debating. Martinez raised his hand slowly. Chief, what happened to Ahmad Ahmadi? He died about 20 minutes after I left the defensive position. Single gunshot wound, center mass. By the time I reached the ridge line, he was gone. The room was absolutely silent. The heroic decision they had been debating suddenly seemed pointless, even tragic. But before he died, Torres continued, he gave me something more valuable than his life. He gave me the location where the Taliban were holding his family and 6 other families of suspected informants. Understanding dawned on several faces around the room. That's right. The mission didn't end with the extraction. It ended when those families were safe. And they couldn't be safe until someone made the decision that their lives were worth more than his own survival. Torres erased the whiteboard and wrote a new message. Honor is not about dying for something. Honor is about living for something that matters more than yourself. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to examine situations where you'll have to choose between following orders and following conscience, between tactical advantage and moral obligation, between personal survival and protecting others. We're going to prepare you for the moments when everything you think you know about being a warrior gets tested by reality. He looked around the room at the young faces, seeing uncertainty and determination in equal measure. Because being a SEAL isn't just about having the skills to complete impossible missions. It's about having the wisdom to understand which missions are worth completing and the courage to pay whatever price that understanding demands. As the class filed out, Torres noticed that many of the candidates seemed different than when they had entered. The easy confidence of youth had been tempered by the first glimpse of the moral complexity they would face as operators. Some looked troubled, others appeared thoughtful, and a few seemed energized by the challenge. Petty Officer Chen approached his desk as the room emptied. Chief, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret it? The choice you made that night. Torres considered the question carefully. Chen, I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Ahmad Ahmadi died. I regret that his family had to go through what they went through. But do I regret choosing to honor his sacrifice by finishing what he started? No, because the alternative would have been living with the knowledge that when someone trusted me with the most important thing in his life, I decided my safety was more important than his legacy. Chen nodded slowly and turned to leave, then paused. Chief, thank you for telling us the truth about what it really means. After she left, Torres sat alone in the empty classroom, surrounded by the diagrams and equations of moral choice that covered the white boards. In 3 hours, he would have another class, filled with different faces asking the same impossible questions that had no easy answers. But that was exactly why this job mattered. These young SEALs needed to understand that honor wasn't something you studied in a classroom. It was something you chose in moments when choosing it cost more than you wanted to pay. And sometimes the most important lesson wasn't teaching them how to make the right choice, but helping them understand that they would have to live with whatever choice they made for the rest of their lives. The Iron Ghost had found his new mission, ensuring that the next generation of warriors understood that some things were worth any price, and that knowing the difference was what separated true warriors from those who merely carried weapons. 6 months into his teaching assignment, Chief Torres received an unexpected visit. He was reviewing training reports in his small office adjacent to the main classroom when his assistant knocked on the door. Chief, there's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Layla Ahmadi and that you knew her father. Torres felt the world shift around him. The pen in his hand stopped moving, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Layla Ahmadi, Ahmed's eldest daughter, who would now be 29 years old. The 8-year-old girl he had helped evacuate from a Taliban prison compound had grown up, somehow found him, and was standing outside his office. Send her in, please. Torres stood and moved to the window, trying to compose himself. In 15 years, he had often wondered what happened to the families he had rescued that night. Intelligence reports had confirmed they reached safe villages, but after that, they had disappeared into the vast network of Afghan refugees scattered across the world. The door opened, and a woman entered who bore a striking resemblance to her father. She was tall and dignified, wearing a conservative business suit and carrying herself with the confident bearing of someone who had built a successful life despite extraordinary challenges. Her dark eyes held intelligence and strength, but also something else that Torres recognized immediately, the particular kind of resilience that came from surviving the unthinkable. Chief Torres. Her English was perfect, with only the slightest accent. Yes, ma'am. Please have a seat. She settled into the chair across from his desk with graceful composure. But Torres could see the slight tremor in her hands that suggested this meeting was as emotionally charged for her as it was for him. I wasn't sure you would see me. I know this is highly irregular. Not irregular at all. I'm honored by your visit. Torres returned to his desk, but remained standing. How did you find me? A slight smile crossed her face. It took 2 years of research, interviews with former military personnel, and several Freedom of Information Act requests. The U.S. military is very good at keeping secrets, but not perfect. Torres nodded, still processing the surreal nature of this reunion. Your father was a brave man, Miss Amati. His courage saved many lives. Dr. Amati, she corrected gently. I'm a physician now, specializing in emergency medicine. And please, call me Layla. Dr. Amati. Torres sat down, studying this remarkable woman who represented living proof that some missions had consequences that echoed far beyond their immediate tactical objectives. May I ask how you came to be here? In America, I mean. After that night, after you rescued us, we were resettled through a coalition refugee program. My uncle sponsored us, brought us to Virginia. I was 13 when we arrived, spoke minimal English, had nightmares every night about men with guns coming to take us away again. She paused, collecting herself before continuing. I decided I wanted to help people the way you helped us. Became a doctor, specialized in trauma medicine, work in an emergency room in Baltimore now. Torres felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was there. This was what victory looked like 15 years later. A frightened child had grown into a woman dedicated to saving lives. Doctor, I'm very glad you found your way here. But I have to ask, why now? Why look for me after all these years? Layla reached into her purse and withdrew a small, weathered notebook. Because I have something that belongs to you. She placed a notebook on Torres's desk. It was clearly old, the leather cover worn smooth by countless handlings, and it was filled with handwritten text in both English and what Torres recognized as Pashto. This was my father's journal. He kept detailed records of all his contacts with coalition forces, including intelligence he provided and observations about the men he worked with. Torres stared at the journal, afraid to touch it. Doctor, this should stay with your family. It's your father's legacy. You misunderstand, Chief. This journal isn't just about my father. Half of it is about you. She opened the journal to a page marked with a cloth bookmark. May I read you something? Torres nodded, not trusting his voice. October 15th, 2011. Met with Captain Hartwell's team today for intelligence briefing. Most of the Americans treat me professionally, but maintain distance. Understandable. They have been betrayed by local informants before. But there is one, the quiet one they call Torres, who listens differently. When I speak, he watches my eyes, not my mouth. He is evaluating whether I can be trusted, but also whether he can be worthy of my trust. This is unusual and hopeful. Layla turned several pages. November 1st, 2011. Torres asked me about my family today. Not for security purposes, the others already have that information. He wanted to know their names, their ages, what they like to do. He asked if my daughters go to school, if my son wants to be a scholar like his father. When I showed him her photograph, he studied their faces carefully and asked what I most wanted for their futures. I believe this man understands that I am not just providing information. I am entrusting him with the lives of everyone I love. Torres felt his throat tighten. He had remembered Ahmad Ahmadi as a brave informant who had sacrificed his life for the mission. He had never realized that Ahmad had seen him as something more than just another American soldier. Doctor, I appreciate you sharing this, but Please, let me finish. Layla turned to another page, and her voice became quieter. November 12th, 2011. Gave Torres the location of the Taliban leadership meeting tomorrow night. He asked 3 times if I was certain this intelligence was reliable, and 3 times I assured him it was. But then he asked something no American has asked me before. Ahmad, are you sure you want us to act on this? Once we do, there will be no going back for you and your family. I told him I was sure, and he nodded. Then he said something I will never forget. If anything happens to you, I want you to know that your courage won't be wasted. I promise. This is not the casual reassurance of a soldier trying to manage an asset. This is the sacred word of a man who understands what I am risking and accepts responsibility for honoring that risk. Layla closed the journal and looked directly at Torres. Chief Torres, I didn't come here just to thank you for rescuing my family, though I will be grateful for that until the day I die. I came here because I needed you to understand something that you might not have realized. What's that, Doctor? My father didn't die serving the American military. He died serving you. Personally, because he believed you were the kind of man who would honor promises even when keeping them cost more than anyone should be asked to pay. Torres stared at the journal, struggling to process this revelation. For 15 years, he had carried the weight of a Ahmadi sacrifice, but he had always thought of it in terms of duty, mission accomplishment, and tactical objectives. The idea that it had been personal, that Ahmad had trusted him specifically rather than the abstract concept of American promises, was overwhelming. Doctor, I'm not sure I understand the distinction you're making. Layla leaned forward slightly. Chief, my father was an intelligent man. He knew the risks of providing intelligence to coalition forces. He knew that most informants were eventually compromised and killed. He also knew that American policy was to minimize risks to U.S. personnel, which meant that in a choice between saving Americans and saving informants, Americans would be chosen. She gestured to the journal. But in his final entries, he wrote that you were different, that you had made it clear his family's safety was your personal responsibility, not just a tactical consideration. When he was dying that night, he wasn't trying to give information to the U.S. military. He was trying to give information to Miguel Torres, because he believed you would honor your personal word even when your government's policy suggested otherwise. Torres felt something shift inside him, a fundamental reframing of everything he thought he understood about that night and the choices he had made. He trusted me personally. More than that, Chief. He made his final sacrifice, believing that your personal honor was worth betting his family's lives on. And he was right. The office fell silent, except for the distant sounds of training exercises from the complex outside. Torres stared at the journal, beginning to understand that his conversation with Admiral Hartwell 6 months ago had only revealed part of the truth about Iron Ghost and its origins. Doctor, there's something I need to tell you. Your father's final words to me before he died. You don't need to tell me, Chief. I know what he said. Torres looked up, surprised. His last journal entry, written the morning of the operation. He wrote that if anything went wrong, if he was injured or killed, he would try to tell you where we were being held. He wrote, if Torres is the man I believe him to be, this information will be enough. If I am wrong about his character, then we were doomed anyway, and at least I will die knowing I trusted someone worthy of trust. Layla reached across the desk and placed her hand on the journal. Chief Torres, for 15 years, my family has known that we are alive because one man decided that keeping a promise to a dying informant was more important than his own survival. But it wasn't until I read my father's complete journal that I understood the full weight of what you carried that night. What do you mean? You weren't just risking your life to save strangers, Chief. You were risking your life to prove worthy of a specific man's faith in your character. You weren't fighting the Taliban for tactical advantage or strategic objectives. You were fighting them because Ahmad Ahmadi had looked into your eyes and decided you were the kind of person who keeps promises even when keeping them might kill you. Torres felt tears beginning to form, though he managed to keep his voice steady. Doctor, your father was wrong about one thing. What's that? I didn't honor his trust despite the risk. I honored it because the risk proved it was worth honoring. Anyone can keep easy promises. But when someone trusts you with something precious enough that they're willing to die for it, breaking that trust becomes a betrayal of everything that matters. Layla smiled, and for a moment, Torres could see echoes of her father's dignity and courage in her expression. That's exactly what he wrote, you would say. He wrote what? She opened the journal to the final entry, dated the morning of November 15th, 2011. I have spent many hours observing Torres, and I believe I understand his character now. He is not a man who sees courage as extraordinary. He sees it as simply the minimum requirement for living with honor. If I die tonight, and he survives, he will not think of himself as a hero for keeping his promise to me. He will think of himself as a man who did what any decent person would do when trusted with something precious. This is why I can trust him with my family's lives. Because for him, betraying that trust would be unthinkable, not because he is superhuman, but because he is exactly what a human being should be. Torres stared at the page, reading his own motivations in the words of a man he had known for only a few months 15 years ago. Ahmad Ahmadi had understood him better than he understood himself. Doctor, what happened to your mother? Your siblings? My mother remarried a few years after we came to America. A good man, an engineer who helped raise us as his own children. My youngest sister is a nurse in Seattle. The middle sister is a teacher in Denver, and my brother is finishing his residency in pediatric surgery. We all chose careers helping people. Your father would be proud. Chief, that's actually why I'm here. Not just to thank you or to give you his journal. Layla reached into her purse again and withdrew a folded document. I'm here to ask you for help. Torres accepted the document and unfolded it. It was a proposal for a foundation called the Ahmad Ahmadi Trust, dedicated to providing medical care and educational support for the families of local interpreters and informants who had assisted coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. Doctor, this is remarkable, but I'm not sure how I can help. I'm a SEAL instructor, not a fundraiser or administrator. You can help by being exactly what you've always been, Chief. Someone who honors promises even when it costs everything. Layla leaned forward intently. There are thousands of people like my family, refugees scattered around the world who risked everything to help American forces. Many of them are struggling, forgotten by the governments they helped, living in poverty despite their courage. She pointed to the document. This foundation would provide medical scholarships, emergency assistance, and educational support for those families. But it needs more than money, Chief. It needs moral authority. It needs someone whose name carries weight in the military community, someone who understands what these families sacrificed and why their sacrifices should be honored. Torres read through the proposal carefully, recognizing the same meticulous planning and attention to detail that had characterized Ahmad Ahmadi's intelligence reports. You wanted to be a board member. I want you to be the founding director, Chief. I want a name on every scholarship we provide, every family we help, every life we save. I want the world to know that Iron Ghost didn't disappear in a legend. I want them to know that some promises are kept forever. Torres set the document down and looked at this remarkable woman who had transformed tragedy into purpose. Doctor, I'm honored by your confidence, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this kind of responsibility. With respect, Chief, you're the only person for this responsibility. Because you're the one person who understands that honoring my father's sacrifice doesn't end with rescuing his family. It continues with making sure that other families who make the same sacrifice receive the same protection. Torres picked up Ahmad Ahmadi's journal and held it carefully, feeling the weight of 15 years of unanswered questions and unresolved obligation. Doctor, if I do this, I need you to understand something. This won't be a part-time commitment or a ceremonial position. If I put my name on this foundation, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it accomplishes what your father would have wanted it to accomplish. Layla smiled, and in that smile, Torres saw not just gratitude but recognition. She had known exactly what his response would be because she understood, as her father had understood, that Miguel Torres was constitutionally incapable of accepting responsibility without accepting it completely. Chief Torres, that's exactly what my father wrote, you would say. 2 hours later, Torres sat alone in his office with Ahmad Ahmadi's journal open before him, reading the words of a man who had seen something in him that he was still struggling to understand. But As he read entry after entry describing his own character through the eyes of someone who had trusted him with everything precious in his life, Torres began to see himself not as he had always imagined, but as he actually was, not a superhuman warrior, but simply a human being who had decided that some things were worth any price. The Iron Ghost had always thought his legend was about courage under fire. But, sitting in his quiet office, reading the words of a dead man who had understood him better than he understood himself, Torres realized that the legend was really about something much simpler and much more profound: the willingness to be worthy of trust, even when being worthy cost everything you had to give. Tomorrow, he would submit his resignation from the training command and begin the work of building something that would honor Ahmad Ahmadi's sacrifice not just for his family, but for every family like his. The Ghost was about to become something more tangible and more enduring than any legend. He was about to become a promise kept. 5 years after founding the Ahmad Ahmadi Trust, Chief Petty Officer Miguel Torres stood before the largest gathering of military veterans, government officials, and refugee advocates in Washington, D.C. history. The Kennedy Center Concert Hall was filled to capacity, with overflow crowds watching on screens in adjacent auditoriums. The occasion was the Trust's annual gala, but this year marked something unprecedented. The first time a foundation created by a former SEAL had successfully influenced international policy on interpreter and informant protection. Torres, now 52 and bearing the distinguished bearing of someone who had spent decades carrying weight that most people couldn't imagine, adjusted his dress uniform as he prepared to deliver the evening's keynote address. The Medal of Honor around his neck caught the stage lights, a decoration he had finally accepted 3 years earlier when President Biden personally presented it to him for his actions in Afghanistan. Torres had initially refused the honor, insisting that he had simply been doing his job, but Admiral Hartwell had convinced him that accepting recognition allowed him to speak with greater authority on behalf of the people they served. "Ladies and gentlemen," Torres began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "5 years ago, I thought I understood what it meant to keep a promise. I thought honor was about individual choices made in moments of crisis. Tonight, I want to tell you about what I've learned since then, and why the work we're doing here represents something much larger than any one person's service or sacrifice." In the audience, Dr. Layla Ahmadi sat in the front row with her family. Her own children, now 8 and 10 years old, listened intently as the man who had saved their grandmother and spoke about the continuing mission that had grown from one night in Afghanistan into a global movement. The Ahmad Ahmadi Trust has now provided support to over 12,000 families in 43 countries, Torres continued. "We funded medical scholarships for 600 students, provided emergency assistance to families facing deportation or persecution, and established educational programs that have helped over 2,000 children of interpreters and informants attend college." The audience applauded, but Torres raised his hand for quiet. "Those are impressive numbers, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is about understanding that every choice we make to honor the trust placed in us creates the foundation for others to make similar choices." He paused, looking out at faces that represented every branch of military service, diplomatic corps, intelligence agencies, and humanitarian organizations. When Ahmad Ahmadi decided to help coalition forces in Afghanistan, he made that decision based on his assessment of whether we deserved his trust. When I decided to honor his sacrifice by protecting his family, I thought I was making a tactical choice about one mission. What I didn't understand then, but do understand now, is that trust is not just personal. It's institutional. It's generational. And it's the foundation upon which all meaningful cooperation between nations and peoples is built. Torres moved from behind the podium, a practice he had developed during his teaching years that made his presentations more personal and immediate. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from a young Marine serving in Somalia. He wrote to tell me that a local informant had approached his unit with intelligence about a planned terrorist attack, but the informant had one condition. He wanted to speak only with someone who had heard of the Ahmad Ahmadi Trust. A murmur passed through the audience as people began to understand the implications of what Torres was describing. This informant, who spoke minimal English and had never met an American before, had heard through local networks that the U.S. military had people who kept promises to local helpers even when keeping those promises was dangerous. He had heard that there was a foundation that proved America didn't forget the families of people who helped us. And based on that reputation, he was willing to risk his life to provide information that prevented an attack on a refugee camp. Torres stopped walking and faced the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, that informant's willingness to trust us saved over 300 innocent lives." But his trust wasn't really in that young Marine or even the U.S. military. His trust was in an idea. The idea that when people help us accomplish our mission, we honor their sacrifice with action, not just words. In the audience, Admiral Hartwell, now retired but serving on the Trust Board of Directors, found himself remembering the day 15 years ago when he had asked about an unusual call sign. The quiet chief who had walked into his office that day had become something unprecedented, a warrior whose legend had evolved into living institution. The work of the Amada Mahdi Trust isn't just about helping refugee families, though that remains our core mission, Torres continued. It's about establishing and maintaining the trust that makes international cooperation possible. Every family we help, every scholarship we provide, every life we save sends a message to people around the world who are trying to decide whether America can be trusted with their most precious possessions, their families, their futures, and their lives. He returned to the podium and opened a folder containing a letter he had received that morning. "I want to read you something from Dr. Ahmadi, who serves as our director of medical programs." He looked toward the front row where Layla sat with her family. "This is from her quarterly report on our scholarship program. To date, our medical scholarship recipients have completed training in emergency medicine, pediatric surgery, infectious disease research, trauma psychology, and refugee health services. These doctors are now serving in refugee camps, urban emergency rooms, rural clinics, and research institutions around the world. They are saving lives every day, but more importantly, they are proving to their communities that education and service are the highest forms of honoring sacrifice." Torres set the letter aside. "Ladies and gentlemen, Ahmad Ahmadi died 15 years ago trying to give me information that would protect his family. Tonight, his daughter runs medical programs that are training the next generation of doctors who specialize in caring for refugees and displaced persons. His grandchildren are growing up in America, attending schools, playing sports, and building lives that would have been impossible if their grandfather had not been willing to trust a stranger with their future." The audience was completely silent now, understanding that they were witnessing something rare, a warrior's complete accounting of what victory actually looked like when measured not in tactical success, but in generational impact. But the most important thing, Dr. Mahdi, and I learned while building this organization, is that honor isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever. Honor is something you earn every day by making choices that prove worthy of the trust placed in you. Torres gestured to a screen behind him that displayed a world map dotted with hundreds of points of light, each representing a family assisted by the trust. Every one of those lights represents someone who decided to trust us with something precious. Some are families we've already helped, others are people still waiting for assistance, and many are people we haven't met yet, but